ChatGPT, they're all like working towards a space of how do we build a tool where people can literally pour junk into it and it will figure something out. Whereas what we should be doing is how do you use that context window very carefully, and it is like programming.
Hello, and welcome to Environment Variables, brought to you by the Green Software Foundation. In each episode, we discuss the latest news and events surrounding green software. On our show, you can expect candid conversations with top experts in their field who have a passion for how to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of software. I'm your host, Chris Adams. Hello, and welcome to This Week in Green Software, where we look at the latest news in sustainable software development. I'm joined once again by my friend and partner in crime, or occasionally crimes, Asim Hussain, the Green Software Foundation. My name is Chris Adams. I am the Director of Policy and Technology at the Green Web Foundation, no longer the Executive Director there, and as we've moved to a co-leadership model. And Asim, really lovely to see you again. And I believe this is the first time we've been on a video podcast together, right?
Yeah. I have to put clothes on now. So that's...
That raises all kinds of questions to how intimate our podcast discussions were before. Maybe they had a different meaning to you than they did to me, actually.
Maybe you didn't know I was naked, but anyway.
No, and that makes it fine. Yeah, that's what matters. I also have to say, this is the first time we get to... I like the kind of Rock in the Galactus style headphones that you've got on.
Yeah,
here.
These are
new ones.
Yeah, no, these are old ones that I posted recently. I actually repaired them. I got my soldering iron and I repaired the jack at the end there. So I'm very proud of myself for having repaired. I had the right to repair, Chris. I had the right to repair it.
Yeah, this is why policy matters.
I also have the capability of repair.
Good, so you can get it. So good on you for saving a bunch of embodied carbon. Yeah. And how that's calculated is something we might touch on.
Yeah.
So, yes. So if you are new to this podcast, my friends, we're just going to be reviewing some of the news and stories that are kind of showed up on our respective radars as we work in our kind of corresponding roles in both the Green Software Foundation and the Green Web Foundation. And hopefully this will be somewhat interesting or at least diverting to people as they wash their dishes whilst listening to us. So that's the plan. Asim, should I give you a chance to just briefly introduce what you do at the Green Software Foundation before I go into this? Because I realized I've just assumed that everyone knows who you are. And I know who you are, but maybe there's people who are listening for the first time, for example.
Oh, yeah. So my name's Asim Hussain. I am a technologist by trade. I've been building software for several decades now. I formed the Green Software Foundation 4 years ago. And now I'm the executive director and I'm basically in charge of, just running the foundation and making sure we deliver against our vision of a future where software has zero harmful environmental impacts.
That's a noble goal to be working for. Mm-hmm. And Asim, I wanted to check, how old is it now? Is it 3 years or 4 years? Because we've been doing this a while, right?
So we just finished, 4 years was May. Mm-hmm. So 4 years. So next birthday is the 5th birthday.
Wow. Yeah. Time flies when the world is burning, I suppose. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So anyway, as per usual, what we'll do, we share all the show notes and any links that we discuss or projects we discuss, we'll do our damnedest to make sure that they're available for anyone who wants to continue their quest in learning more about sustainability in the field of software. And I suppose, Asim, it looks like you're sitting comfortably now. Yeah. Should we start looking at some of the news stories?
Let's go for it.
All right. Okay. The first one we have is a story from Hugging Face. This is actually a few months back, but it's one to be aware of if it missed you the first time. So Hugging Face released a new tool called Chat UI Energy that essentially lets you see the energy impact live from using a kind of chat session, a bit like ChatGPT or something like that. I think we both had a chance to play around with this, and we'll share a link to the actual story around it, especially as well as the actual repo that's online. What do you think of this? What's your immediate kind of like take when you see this and have a bit of a poke around with this?
Well, it's good. I mean, I want to make sure it's a really nice addition to a chat interface. So just so the audience who's not seeing it, every time you do a prompt, it tells you the energy in watt hours, what I'm seeing right now, but then also some other stats as well. And then also kind of how much of a phone charge it is. And that's probably the most surprising one. I just did a prompt which was 5.7% of a phone charge, which was, that's pretty significant. Actually, I don't know, is that significant? So one of the things is what I'm trying to find out from it though is how does that calculation, because that's my world. It's like, what do you really mean by a calculation? Is it cumulative? Is it session based? Is it just, what have you calculated in terms of the energy emissions? The little info on the side is like, it's just the energy of the GPU during inference. So it's not the energy of kind of anything else in the entire user journey of me using a UI to ask a prompt. But we also know that's probably the most significant. And I'm kind of quite interested in figuring out, like, as I'm prompting it, one of the things I'm seeing is that every single prompt is actually, the emissions are bigger than the previous prompt. Oh no, it's not actually. That's not true. Yeah, it is.
This is your bugbear, the thing you were mentioning about cumulative context, cumulative, right?
Yeah. Which is a confusing one, because I've had a lot of people who are very, very, very good AI engineers go, Asim, no, that's not true. And other people going, yeah, it kind of is true. But they've just optimized it to the point where the point at which you get hit with that is at a much larger number. But the idea is that it used to be an n squared issue for your prompt and your prompt session history. So like every time you put a new prompt in, all of your past session history was sent with your next prompt. And if you are actually building your own chat system, so if you are actually building like your own chat solution for your company or wherever, that is typically how you would implement it, as a very toy solution to begin with, is just, take all the text that was previous and the new text and send it in the next session. But I think what they were explaining to me, which was actually in the more advanced solutions, like, the ones from Claude or ChatGPT, there's a lot of optimization that happens behind the scenes. So it doesn't really happen that way. But I was trying to figure out whether it happens with this interface, and I haven't quite figured it out yet.
Not? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think what you might be referring to is the fact that when you have like a GPU card or something like that, there's like new tokens and kind of cached tokens, which are priced somewhat differently now. And this is one of the things that we've seen, because it's using maybe a slightly different kind of memory, which might be slightly faster, or is slightly kind of works out to be slightly lower cost to service in that sense. Yeah. Okay, so this is one thing that we don't see. The good news is we can share a link to this for anyone listening. This source code is all on GitHub, so we can have a look at some of this. And one of the key things you'll see actually is, this is sending a message. When you see the actual numbers update, it's not actually, what it's actually doing is it's calculating all this stuff client side based on how big each model is likely to be. Because when you look at this, you can
it's a model.
Yeah, right. You can work out so when people talk about, should I be using the word please or thank you? Am I making things worse by treating this like a human, or should I just be prompting the machine like a machine? Like, is there a carbon footprint to that? This will display some numbers that you can see there, but this has all been calculated inside your browser rather than actually on the server. So like you said, Asim, there is a bit of a model that's taking place here, but as a kind of way to like mess around and kind of have a way into this is quite interesting. And even now, it's kind of telling that there are so few providers that make any of this available right now. We're still struggling, even in like the third quarter of 2025, to have a commercial service that will expose these numbers to you in a way that you can actually meaningfully change the environmental footprint of, through either your prompting behavior or maybe model choice. But that's one of the key things that I see. I can't think of any large commercial service that's doing this. The only one is possibly Green PT, I think, which is basically put a front end on Scaleway's inference service. And I'm not sure how much is being exposed there for them to like make some assumptions as well.
Do you know how bad, how I feel very uncomfortable with the idea of a future where a whole bunch of people are not saying please or thank you. And the reason for it is they're proudly saying, well, I care about sustainability. So I'm not going to say please or thank you anymore because it's costing too much carbon. I find that very uncomfortable. I personally, I don't want to, like, we could choose not to say please or thank you in all of our communications because it causes emissions no matter what you do. I don't know.
I'm glad you went there, Asim, because I was thinking about that too. There's a carbon cost to like breathing out. And if you, I guess, maybe that's because we're both English and it's kind of hardwired into us. It's like the same way that, like if you were to step on my toe, I would apologize to you stepping on my toe because I'm English.
Yeah.
It's a muscle memory kind of like impulse thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we found. We'll share a couple of links to both the news article, the project on Hugging Face, and I believe it's also on GitHub. So we can like check this out and possibly make a PR to account for the different kinds of caching that we just discussed to see if that does actually make a meaningful difference on this. For other people who are just curious about this, this is one of the tools which also allows you to look at basically not only through weird etiquette, how etiquette can impact the carbon footprint of using a tool, but also your choice of model. So some models might be, say, 10 times the size or something, but if they're not 10 times as good, then there's an open question about whether it's really worth using them, for example. And I guess that might be a nice segue to the next story that we touch on. But Asim, I'll let you about to say something, I think.
No, I was going to say, because I've been diving into this like a lot recently, which is, how do you efficiently use AI? Because I think a lot of the content that's out there about, AI's emissions and what to do to reduce AI's emissions, they're all the choices that as a consumer of AI, you have absolutely no ability to affect. I mean, unless you're somebody who's quite comfortable, taking an open source model and rolling out your own infrastructure or this or that or the other. If you're just like an everyday, not even an everyday person, but just somebody who works in a company who's like, their company bought Claude, you're using Claude, end of story. What do you do? And I think that's it's a really interesting area. I might just derail our whole conversation, talk about this. But I think it's a really interesting area because what it's really boiling down to is your use of the context window. And so you have like a certain number of tokens in a chat before that chat implodes and you can't use that chat anymore. And historically, those number of tokens were quite low relative to, because of all the caching stuff hadn't been invented yet, and this and that and the other. So the tokens were quite low. What didn't mean they didn't mean the prompts were cheaper before. I think they were still causing a lot of emissions, but because they've improved the efficiency, and rather than just said, I've improved the efficiency, leave it at that. I've improved the efficiency, Jevon's products. I've improved the efficiency. Let's just give people more tokens to play around with before we lock them out. So the game that we're always playing is how to actually efficiently use that context. And the please or thank you question is actually, I don't think it's that good one because it's like 2 tokens in a context window of a million now is kind of what's coming down the pipeline. But the whole game, and I think this is where we're coming from as if you want to be in the green software space and actually have something positive to say about how to actually have a relationship with AI, it's all about managing that context. Because the way context works is you're just trying to, it's like you've got this intern, and if you flash a document at this intern, you can't then say, oh, ignore that, forget, I didn't mean to show you that. It's too late. They've got it, and it's in their memory, and you can't get rid of it. The only solution is to literally execute that intern and bury their body and get a new intern, and then make sure they see the information in the order and only the information they need to see, so that when you finally ask them that question, they give you the right answer. And so what a lot of people do is because there's a very limited understanding of how to understand how to play with this context space, what people end up doing is they're just going, listen, here's my entire freaking document. It's actually 50,000 words long. You've got it. And now I'm going to ask you, what did I do last Thursday? So and all of that context is wasted. And I think it's also like a very simplistic way of using an AI, which is why like a lot of companies are kind of moving towards that space, because they know that it means the end user doesn't have to be very well versed in the use of the tool in order to get a benefit out of it. So that's why ChatGPT, they're all like working towards a space of how do we build a tool where people can literally pour junk into it and it will figure something out. Whereas what we should be doing, and what I'm like, and I think it's not only what we should be doing, it's what the people who are like really like looking at how to actually get real benefit from AI. It's how do you use that context window very carefully. And it is like programming. It is really like programming. That's my experience with it so far. It's like, I need to feed this AI information. It's going to get fed in an order that matters. It's going to get fed in a format that matters. I need to make sure that the context I'm giving it is exactly right and minimal for the question that I want to answer, get it answered at the end of it. And so we're kind of in this like space of abundance where, because every AI provider is like, well, do what you want. Here's 1 million tokens. Do what you want. And we're all just chucking money. We're all chucking all our context tokens at it. They're burning money on the other side because they're not about making a profit at the moment. They're just about becoming the winner. So they don't really care about kind of profitability to that level. So what us, it's all about, I'm just getting back to it again. I think we need to eventually be telling that story of like, how do you actually use the context window very carefully? And again, it's annoyed me that the conversation has landed at please and thank you, because the actual conversation should be, turn that Excel file into a CSV, because it knows how to parse a CSV and it uses fewer tokens to parse a CSV than an Excel file. Don't dump the whole Excel file. Export the sheet that you need in order for it to answer that question. If you F up, don't just kill the session and start a new session. There's this advice that we need to be giving that I don't even know yet.
MVP, minimal viable prompt.
Minimal viable prompt. Yeah, what is the minimal viable prompt? And what's frustrating me is that, like, one of the things that we use Claude, and I use Claude a lot, and Claude's got a very limited context window, and I love that. It was like Twitter when you had to, remember Twitter when you had to like have 160
140 characters before you could be expansive to 280, and then if you're prepared to be on that website, you can be as you can monologue as much as you want, basically.
Yeah, you can now monologue, but it was beautiful having to express an idea in this short. I love that whole, how do I express this complex thing in a tweet? And so with the short context windows, we were kind of forced to do that. And now I'm really scared because now Claude literally 2 days ago has now gone, right, you've got 1 million context window. And I'm like, oh, damn it. Now I don't have personally even that pressure.
And that's a 1 million token context window when you say that, right? So that's enough for like a small book, basically. I can dump an entire book into it and then ask questions about it. Yeah. Okay, well, I guess it depends on the size of your book, really. Yeah. But yeah, so that's what you're referring to when you talk about 1 million context window there.
Yeah. And there's kind of an energy question, but the energy doesn't really, kind of knowing how much, like, I've just looked at chat UI window and I've checked a couple of prompts and it's told me the energy, and it's kind of that same world. It's just there to make me feel guilty. Whereas like the actual advice you should be getting is like, well, actually, no, what do I do? How am I supposed to prompt this thing to actually make it consume less energy? And that's Oh, I see. So not giving that advice. Yeah.
So this is like, you're showing me this thing, and now you're making me feel bad. Yeah. And this may be why various providers of hosted chat tools who want people to use them more don't automatically ship the features that make people feel bad without giving them a thing they can actually do to improve that experience. And it may be that it's harder to share some of the guidance, like you just shared about, like making a minimum viable prompt or a kind of clear prompt. I mean, to be honest, in defense of Anthropic, they do actually have some pretty good guidance now, but I'm not aware of any of it that actually talks about in terms of here's how to do it for the lowest amount of potential tokens, for example.
No, I don't see them. I don't see them. I mean, they do have like stuff which is how to optimize your context window, but at the same time, they're living in this world where everybody's now
working with very large
to a bigger. That's what they have to do. And I don't know. It's kind of like, where do we? Because the AI advice we would typically have given in the past, or we would typically give, is like, listen, just run your AI in a cleaner region. And you're like, well, I can't bloody do that with Anthropic, can I? It's this, whatever it is. It's that
feels like a soluble problem, though. Like
what I'm just saying, or
but like the idea that saying, hey, I want to use a service, and I want to have some control over where this is actually served from. That is a thing that you can plausibly do. And that's maybe a thing that's not exposed by end users, but that is something that is doable. And I mean, we can touch on. We actually did speak about. We got Mistral's LCA reporting as one of the things where they do offer some kind of control, not directly, but basically by saying, well, because we run our stuff in France, we're already using a low carbon grid. So it's almost like by default you're choosing this rather than you explicitly opting in to have like the kind of greener one by default, the green one through an active choice there, I suppose.
And they're building some data centers over there as well, aren't they? So it's a big advantage for Mistral to be in France, to be honest with you. It's like, I
mean, this definitely does help. This, I mean, okay, well, we had this on our list actually, so maybe this is something we can talk about for our next story, because another one on our list since we last spoke was actually a blog post from Mistral.ai talking about, they refer to in a rather grandiose terms, our contribution to a global environmental standard for AI. And this is them sharing for the first time something like lifecycle analysis data about using their models. And it's actually one that has, it's not just them who've been sharing this. They actually did work with a number of organizations, both France's agency, ADAM. They were following a methodology specifically set out by AFNOR, which is a little bit like one of the French kind of environmental agency, the frugal AI methodology. And they were working with, I think, 2 organizations. I think it's Soprasteria, and I forget the name of the other one who was mentioned here. But it's not just like a kind of throwaway quote from, say, Sam Altman. It's actually, here we are. It's working with both Hublot, which is a non-profit consultancy based in Paris, and Resilio, who are a Swiss organization who are actually also who are very well respected and peer reviewed inside this. So you had some things to share about this one as well, because I think this felt like it was a real step forward from commercial operators, but still falling somewhat short of where we kind of need to be. So it seemed like when you read this, what were the first things that occurred to you, I suppose? Were there any real takeaways for you?
Well, I'd heard about this on the grapevine last year, because I think one of the researchers from Resilio was at Green.io, in Singapore, and I was there, and he gave a sneak. They didn't say who it was going to be. They didn't say it was Mistral, but they said we are working on one, and he had like enough to like tease some of the aspects of it. I suspect once it's got released, some of the actual detail work has not. That's what I think unless there's a paper I'm missing. But yeah, there is kind of more work, I think, here that didn't end up to actually get released once it got announced. But it was a large piece of work. It's good. It's the first AI company in the world of this size that has done any work in this space and released it, other than like a flippant comment from Sam Altman. I heard some people seem to care about the energy consumption of AI. So that's good, and I think we're going to use this. It's going to be used in kind of as I'd say a proxy or an analog for kind of many other situations. I think it is lacking a little bit in the detail, but that's okay. I think every single company that started, we should celebrate every organization that leads forward with some of this stuff. It's always when you're inside these organizations, it's always a very hard headwind to push against, because there's a lot of negative reasons to release stuff like this, especially when you're in a very competitive space like AI. So they took the lead. We should celebrate that. I think there's some data here that we can use as models for other, when we now want to kind of like look at what are the emissions of Anthropic or OpenAI or Gemini or something like that. There's some more analogs that we can use, but also not a huge amount of surprise. I'd say it's kind of a training and inference.
Yep, that turns out to be where the environmental footprint is.
Yeah. Training and inference, which is good. I mean, I think obviously hardware and embodied impacts is that they kind of separate the kind of the two together. I suspect the data center construction is probably going to be, I don't know. That is quite low. Yeah.
When I looked at this, I mean, it's been very difficult to actually find any kind of meaningful numbers to see what share this might actually make, because as the energy gets cleaner, it's likely this will be a larger share of emissions. But one thing that surprising here was like, this is, France, which is a relatively clean grid, like maybe between 40 and say 60 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which is that's 10 times better than the global average, right? Or maybe between 8 and 10 times cleaner than the global average. And even then, it's so with the energy being that clean, you would expect the embodied emissions from like data centers and stuff to represent a larger one. But the kind of high level, kind of pretty looking graphic that we see here shows that it's less than 2% across all these different kind of impact criteria, like carbon emissions or water consumption or materials, for example. This is one thing that I was expecting it to be larger, to be honest. The other thing that I noticed when I looked at this is that, like, dude, there's no energy numbers. Like, and this is the thing that it feels like this is the thing that everyone's continually asking for.
What's an LCA? So they use the LCA specification.
That's a very good point. You're right. That's a valid response, I suppose, because energy by itself doesn't have a carbon footprint, but the results of generating that electricity does have that impact. So maybe that's
so for the audience, they use like a well-known, well-respected, standardized way of reporting the life cycle emissions using the LCA lifecycle analysis methodology, which is like an ISO certified standard of doing it. So they adhere to a standard.
So this actually made me realize, if this is basically here and you're a customer of a AI provider, because we were looking at this ourselves, trying to figure out, okay, well, what people speak to us about AI policies, and we realized, like, well, we should probably, what would you want to have inside one? The fact that you have a provider here who's actually done this work does suggest that it's possible to actually request this information if you're a customer under NDA, in the same way that if you're speaking to Amazon or probably any of the large providers, if you're spending enough money with them, you can have information that's disclosed to you directly under NDA. So it may not be great for the world to see, but if you're an organization and you're using, say, Mistral, for example, or Mistral services, this would make me think that they're probably more able to provide much more detailed information so that you can at least make some informed decisions in a way that you might not be able to get from some of the other competing providers. So maybe that's one thing that we actually do see that is a kind of not really a published benefit in this sense, but is something that you're able to do if you are in a decision-making position yourself and you're looking to choose a particular provider, for example.
Yeah. You should always be picking the providers who've actually got some
optimize for disclosure.
Optimize for disclosure. Yeah. Always be picking the providers that we optimize for disclosure. I mean, if the people listening to this, that is like what the thing that you can do. And Mistral, I mean, they have some arguments in here as well, which is kind of, they did kind of also surface that it is like a pretty linear relationship between your emissions and the size of the model, which is a very useful piece of information for us to know as a consumer, because then we can go, well, actually, I've heard all these stories about use smaller models, and now you actually have some data behind it, which is supporting the fact that, using a smaller model isn't like, it's not got some weird non-linearity to it. So like a half-size model is only like 10% less emissions. A half-size model is half the emissions. So that's a pretty good thing to know. Helps Mistral, the fact that they have a lot of small models that you can pick and choose. It's not like so a lot of this stuff really benefits Mistral. They are the kind of organization which has a product offering which is which does benefit a sustainability community. So they have like small models you can use. I wonder actually, Chris, because they do say that they're building our own data center in France, but they've never said where until now where they've been running their AI. So that might be the reason they might have been running it in East Coast US or something like that.
I think that would be wouldn't be very likely, given that most of their customers are based in probably Western Europe still, right? There is very much a kind of like Gallic kind of flavor to the tooling. Yeah. And actually Mistral or like Mistral's tools are ones which I've been using myself personally over the last like few months, for example. And I it's also worth bearing in mind that they they took on a significant amount of investment from Microsoft a few years back, and I would be very surprised if they weren't using a French data center serving French providers. Because if you were to choose between two countries, like, okay, if France actually has, and since 2021, I believe, has had actually a law specifically about measuring the environmental footprint of digital services. So they've got things that they I think it's called. I'm just going to share a link to that to the name of the law, because I'm going to butcher the French pronunciation.
Okay.
But it basically it translates to like reduce the environmental footprint of digital services law. That's pretty much it. And that's where, as a follow-on from that, that's what the RGESN, the kind of general guidance that is shared across kind of government websites in general for France. They've already got a bunch of this stuff out there for like how to do greener IT. I suspect that France is probably going to be probably the premier country if you'd be running a startup to see something like this happening, much more so than probably the US right now, especially given the current kind of push with its current kind of federal approach, which is basically calling into doubt climate change in the wider sense, basically.
Yeah.
So we were talking about disclosure, right? And we said an optimization for disclosure. And that's probably a nice segue to talk about another link we had here, which was the Energy Score leaderboard. Because this is one thing that we frequently point to, and this is one thing that we've suggested in my line of work, that if you're looking to find some particular models, one of the places to look would be the AI Energy Score leaderboard, which is actually maintained by Hugging Face. And I share this because it's one of the few places where you can say, I'm looking for a model to help me maybe do something like image generation or captioning text or generating text or doing various things like this. And you can get an idea of how much power these use on a standardized setup, plus how what the kind of satisfaction score might be based on these tools and based on a kind of standardized set of like tests, I suppose. The thing is, though, this looks like it hasn't been updated since February. So for a while I was thinking, oh, Jesus, does this mean we actually need to do we have to be careful about how we recommend this? But it turns out that there's a new release that'll be coming out in September. It's updated every 6 months. And now that I do have to know about AI, this is one thing that I'm looking forward to seeing some of the releases on, because if you look at the leaderboard for various slices, you'll see things like Microsoft Phi 1 or Google Gemma 2 or something like that. And
is that quite old?
Yeah, these are old now. It's 6 months in like generative AI land is quite a long time. There's like Phi 4 now, for example, and there's a bunch of these out there. So I do hope that we'll see this actually. And if you feel the same way,
can I ask you?
Yeah, go on.
Because I always assumed this was like a live leaderboard. So as soon as a model, I suppose, once a model, like the emissions of a model linked to the model and the version of it. So once you've computed that and put it on the leaderboard, it's not going to change. So then it's just a case of like, as new models come out, you just measure it and it just sees how it goes on the leaderboard. Because I'm seeing something here. I'm seeing OpenAI GPT. Isn't that the one they just released?
No, you're thinking GPT-OSS perhaps. That's one thing they had from a while ago. So that one, for example, came out less than 2 weeks ago, I believe. That isn't showing up here.
That isn't showing up here, right?
I was actually looking at this thinking, oh, hang on, it's 6 months, something being updated 6 months. It'd be nice if there was a faster way to expedite kind of getting things disclosed to this. For example, let's say I'm working in a company and someone's written in a policy that says only choose models that disclose in the public some way. This is one of the logical places where you might be looking for this stuff right now, for example. And there's a 6 month lag, and I can totally see a bunch of people saying, no, I don't want to do that. But right now, there's a 6 month kind of update process for this.
In the AI realm is an eternity.
Yeah. But at the same time, it feels like a thing that this is a thing that should be funded, right? I mean, it feels like I wish there was a mechanism by which organizations that do want to list the things, how to make them to kind of pay for something like that so they can actually get this updated so that you've actually got some kind of meaningful centralized way to see this. Because whether we like it or not, people are basically rolling this stuff out, whether we like it or not. And I feel like in the absence of any kind of meaningful information or very, very patchy disclosure, you do need something. And like this is one of the best resources I've seen so far, but it would be nice to have it updated. So this is why I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in September. And if you if you too realize that like models, timely access to information about models might be useful, it's worth getting in touch with these folks here, because I asked them about this when I was trying to see when they were, what the update cycle was. And basically the thing I said was like, yeah, we're really open to people speaking to us to figure out a way to actually create a faster funded mechanism for actually getting things listed so that you can have this stuff visible. Because as I understand it, this is a labor of love by various people, between their day jobs, basically. So it's not like they've got like 2 or 3 FTE all day long working on this, but it's something that is used by hundreds of people. It's the same kind of open source problem that we see again and again and again. But this is like one of the pivotal data sources that you could probably cite in the public domain right now. So this is something that would be really nice to actually have resolved.
Because there is actually, because the way Hugging Face works is it's they have a lab and they have their own infrastructure. Is that how it works? Yeah. So that's,
I think that was Bennett. That was either that was physically theirs, or it was just some space
spin up
provided for them, right?
Yeah, but they have to effectively, like, to get the score here. It's not self-certified, I presume, but there's each of these things has got to get run against a benchmark. So there's basically if I remember rightly, there was a way of like self-certifying. Like there was literally a way for OpenAI.
You could upload your stuff.
Yeah, OpenAI could like disclose to the Hugging Face, to what the emissions of, what the energy of it was. But most of it is, there's actually, you've got to run against the H100 and there's a benchmark that they run.
Exactly. So there's a bit of manual steps to do that. And this is precisely the thing that you'd expect, that really it's not like an insoluble problem to have some way to actually expedite this so that people across the industry have some mechanism to do this. Because right now, it's really, really hard to make informed decisions about either model choice or anything like that, even if you were to kind of like architect a more responsibly designed system, particularly in terms of environmental impact here.
Because if you were to release a new model and you wanted it listed in the leaderboard, you would have to run every other model against. Well, how would you need to do that? You need to run every other model.
You just need to like, you because you don't have control over when it's released.
Yeah.
You have to wait 6 months until the people who are working in that get around to doing that.
Just a time. It's just a time. Yeah, someone's got to put time.
And if you're going to spend millions of dollars on something like this, it feels like this is not like, even if you were to drop, say, like, even if it was to cost maybe, say, a figure in the low thousands to do something like this, just to get that listed and get that visible, that would be worth it, so that you've actually got like a functioning way for people to actually disclose this information to inform decisions. Because right now, there's nothing that is easy to find. This is probably the easiest option I've seen so far. And we've only just seen like the AI code of practice that's actually kind of been that came into effect in August in Europe, for example. But even then, you still don't really have that much in the way of like public ways to filter or look for something based on the particular task you're trying to achieve. I wanted to ask you actually, Asim.
Yeah.
So I think I can't remember last time if I was speaking to you if this came up. I know that with your GSF hat on, there's been some work to create a software carbon intensity for AI spec, right?
Yeah.
Now, I know that there's a thing where, a bit like court cases, you don't want to kind of prejudice the discussions too much by having things internally. Like, although you're probably not, there isn't like AI court you can be in contempt of, but like,
well, not yet.
Yeah, not yet, but who knows? Give it another 6 months. Is there anything that like? Is there anything, any juicy gossip or anything you can share that people have been learning? Because like you folks have been diving into this with a bunch of domain experts so far, and like this isn't my I do some of this, I'm not involved in those discussions. So I mean, I'm aware that there has been a bunch of work trying to figure out, okay, how do you standardize around this? What do you measure? Do you count tokens? Do you count like a prompt? Like, what's the thing? Is there anything that you can share that you're allowed to talk about before it goes?
Yeah, I think that what we've landed on is that as long as I'm not discussing stuff which is in like active discussion and it's kind of made its way into the spec and there's been broad consensus over, I think it's pretty safe to talk about it. But if there's something that's kind of, and what we do everything in GitHub, so if there's something which is like I won't discuss anything which is only being discussed in like an issue or a discussion or a comment thread or something. If it's actually made its way into the actual spec, that's pretty safe. So yeah, the way it's really landed is that there was a lot of conversations at the start. There was a lot of conversations, and I was very confused. I didn't really know where things were going to end up with. But at the start, there was a lot of conversations around like, well, how do we deal with training? How do we deal with training there's this thing called inference. And it's interesting because when we look at a lot of other specs that have been created, even the way the Mistral LCA was done, so they gave a per inference or per request. I've forgotten what they did. They didn't do it per token. So per request.
They do per chat session or per task, right? I think it's something along those lines, yeah.
Something along those lines, but it wasn't a per token thing. But even then, they added the training cost to it, and like those are some of the questions we were adding. Like, can you add? Is there a way of adding like the training happened like ages ago? Can you somehow? Is there a function that you can use to amortize that training to like future inference runs? And we explored like lots of conversations. There's like a decay function. So if you were the first person to use a new model, the emissions per token will be higher because you're amortizing more of the training cost. And the older models, so you explored like a decay function. There's lots of ideas.
So this is very similar to like the embodied usage. Essentially, like what we have with embodied versus embodied carbon versus like use time carbon. You're essentially doing the same thing for training being like the embodied bit and inference being the usage. And like if you had training and you had like 3 inferences, each of those inferences is massive, like in terms of the embodied carbon. If there's like 1 billion, it's going to be much lower for each one.
But then you get into really weird problems because, I mean, we do that with the embodied carbon hardware, but we do that by saying, do you know what? The lifespan's going to be 4 years and that's it. And we're just going to pretend it's an equal weighting every single day for 4 years. And
not
if it's
with
5
the
years,
GHG protocol. You can't do it with the GHG protocol. You can't amortize it out like that. You have to like do it the same year. So your emissions look awful 1 year, and then you get it free for the other year. So this is actually one of the reasons. But this is actually one of the problems with the kind of default way of measuring embodied carbon versus other things inside this. It's not like Facebook, for example. They've proposed another way of measuring it, which does have this kind of amortization approach, which is quite a bit closer to how you might do, I guess, like typical amortization of like capital expenditure, for example. So that's the difference in the models. And these are some of the kind of, honestly, sometimes tedious details that actually have quite a significant impact. Because if you did have to, like, that's going to have totally different incentives.
Exactly.
If you especially at the beginning of something, if you said, well, if you pay the full cost, then you're incentivized not to use this shiny new model because it makes you look awful compared to you using an existing one, for example.
And that's one of the other questions. Like, is like, how do you? I mean, a lot of these questions were coming up. Like, what do you? We didn't pick that solution, and we also didn't pick the solution of like we actually had the conversation of like you amortize it over a year, and then there's a cliff, and then that was like we're going to incentivize people to use older models with this idea that older models were the thing. There are questions that pop up all the time. It's like, what do you do when you have an open source model? Like if I was to fine tune an open source model and then make a service based off of that, is the emissions of the model, the open source model that I got, Llama, whatever it was, am I responsible for that? Or is and there was like, if you were to say no, then you're incentivizing people to just like open source their models and go, well, the emissions are free now because I'm using an open source model. So there's lots of these. It's very nuanced. Kind of a lot of the conversation we have in the standard space is like a small decision can actually have a cascading series of unintended consequences. So the thing that we really like sat down was like, what do you want to incentivize? Let's just start there. What do we want to incentivize? Okay, we've listed those things we want to incentivize. Right, now let's design a metric which through no accident incentivizes those things. And where they ended up was basically there's going to be two measures. So we didn't solve the training one because there isn't a solution to it. It's a different audience that cares about the training emissions than doesn't. Consumers, it's not important to you because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't change how you behave with a model. It doesn't change how you prompt a model just because it had some training emissions in the past. What matters to you most is your direct emissions from your actions you're performing at that given moment in time. So there's likely going to be like 2 SCI scores for AI, a consumer and a provider. So the consumer is like inference plus everything else. And but also what is the functional unit? There's a lot of conversations here as well. And that's likely to land at now basically the same as how you sell an AI model. So if you're an LLM, you're typically selling by token. And so why, for us to pick something which isn't token in a world where everybody else is thinking token, would be a very strange choice. And it would make the decision really hard for people when they're evaluating certain models. They'd be like, oh, it's this many dollars per token for this one and this many dollars per token for that one. But it's a carbon per groat and it's a carbon per groat. I can't rationalize that. Where if it's like, well, look, that's $2 per token, but one gram per token of emissions, and that's $4 per token, but half a gram per token for emissions, I can evaluate the kind of cost carbon trade-off like a lot easier. The cognitive load is a lot easier.
Okay, so you're normalizing on the same units essentially, right?
Yeah, however it's sold, because it's a fast. AI is also a very fast moving space, and we don't know where it's going to land in 6 months. But we are pretty sure that people are going to figure out how to sell it.
Yeah,
in a way that makes sense. So lining up the carbon emissions to how it's sold, and the provider one is going to be. That's going to include like the training emissions, but also like data and everything else. And that's going to be probably per version of an AI. And that will, so you can imagine like OpenAI, like ChatGPT would have a consumer score of carbon per token and also a provider score of ChatGPT 5 has, and it's going to be probably like per flop or something. So per flop of generating ChatGPT 5, it was this much carbon. And that's really like how it's it's also not going to be total. Totals are like, forget about totals. Totals are pointless when it comes to changing behavior. You really want to have like there's this thing called the neural scaling laws, the paper from OpenAI.
Is that the one that you double the size of the model when it's supposed to double the performance? Is that the thing? So that's a different paper. It's not
double, but yeah, it's got a relationship. Yeah. So there's this perfectly logarithmic relationship between model accuracy and model size, model accuracy and the data, the number of training you put into it, and model size and the amount of compute you put into it. It's a logarithmic. So it's often used as like the rationale for like why we need to, larger models is because we can prove it. So, but that basically comes down to like, really then, like if like I care more about, but for instance, it doesn't matter to me how much, it's not that important to know the total training emissions of ChatGPT 5 versus ChatGPT 4. What's far more useful is to know, well, what was the carbon per flop of training for 4 versus the carbon per flop of training for 5? Because then that gives you more interesting information. Like, did you even bother to do anything? Huh?
Yeah, what does that allow me to do if I know if 5 is 10 times worse per flop than 4? What does that incentivize me to do differently? Because I think I might need a bit of help here making this call here.
Because I think, let's say ChatGPT 6 is going to come along. The one thing we know absolutely sure is it's just going to be, in terms of total, bigger than ChatGPT 5. So as like a metric, it's not, if you're an engineer, if you're somebody trying to make decisions regarding what do I do to actually train this model with causing less emissions, it doesn't really help me because it's just a number that goes higher and higher.
Oh, is it like carbon intensity of a firm versus absolute emissions? Is that the argument you're using? So it doesn't matter that Amazon's emissions have increased by 20%. The argument is like, well, if they've got more efficient per dollar of revenue, then that's still improvement. That's the line of reasoning that's using, right?
Yeah. So it's because of the way the SCI is, it's not like, if you want to do a total, there are LCAs, like the thing that Mistral did. Like there's existing standards that are very well used, they're very well respected. There's a lot of information about how to do them. You can just use those mechanisms to calculate a total. What the SCI is all about is what is a KPI that a team can use and they can optimize against. So over time, the product gets more efficient, obviously, you should also be calculating your totals and be making a decision based upon both. But just having a total is I've got to be honest with you, it's just I don't see totals of having, in terms of changing behavior, I don't think it changes any behavior, like full stop.
Okay. Yeah. I want to put aside the whole we live in a physical world with physical limits and everything like that. But I think the argument you're making is essentially that because you need something to at least allow you to course correct on the way to reducing emissions in absolute terms, for example. And your argument making is if you at least have an efficiency figure, that's something you can kind of calibrate and change over time in a way that you can't with absolute figures, which might be like having a budget between now and 2030, for example. That's the thinking behind it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've actually got an example here so we don't have actual compute. No one's ever disclosed like the actual compute that they used per model, but they used to disclose the number of parameters per model, and we know that there's a relationship. So there's a really interesting. So for 2, 3, and 4, we have some idea regarding the training emissions and the parameters, not from a disclosure, from like research as well. So but when you compute the emissions per billion parameters of the model, so per billion parameters of the model, GPT-2 was 33.3 tons of carbon per billion parameters of the model.
Okay.
GPT-3 went down to 6.86 tons of carbon per billion parameters. So it went down from 33 to 6. So that was a good thing. It feels like a good thing. But we know the total emissions of 3 was higher. Interestingly, GPT-4 went up to 20 tons of carbon per billion parameters. So that's like an interesting thing to know. It's like you did something efficient between 2 and 3. You did something good, whatever it was. We don't know what it was. We did something good. Actually, the carbon emissions per parameter reduced. Then you did something, maybe it was bad, maybe it was necessary, maybe it was architectural, but for some reason your emissions, your
became
tonnage,
massively less efficient in the next iteration.
In terms of carbon, you became a lot less efficient in GPT-4. We have no information about GPT-5. I hope it's less than 20 metric tons per billion parameters.
I think I'm starting to understand, follow your argument, and I'm not going to say I agree with it or not, but I think the argument you're making is essentially by switching from that itself is a useful signal that you can then do something with. Like there was maybe like a regression or a bug that happened in that one that you can say, well, what changed that I need to do so I can actually start working my way towards, I don't know, us careering less forcefully towards oblivion, for example, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes. I think I understand that now. And I suppose the question I should ask following on from that is that we got onto this because we were talking about the SCI for AI, this kind of standard, or presumably an ISO standard that we published. Is there a kind of rough like roadmap for when this is going to be in the public domain, for example, or people might be requesting this in commercial agreements or something like that?
I mean, I can tell you what my hope is. So I think, because everything is based upon consensus, and if anybody objects, then everything, or all the plans basically, put on the back burner. But everything's looking very positive. I'm very, very hopeful that by the end of Q3, so the end of September, we will have gone into draft. And then there hasn't been a full agreement yet as to what we'll actually publish for that, but I'm hoping we'll be able to actually publish the whole specification. Because what we want to start doing is maybe if anybody's interested, we want to start running case studies, because right now it's like the outline of what we want the calculation to be is being agreed on, but we need a lot of use cases of very different types of products that have computed using it. Not just, I'm a major player and I've got a gazillion servers, and we also need people. There's lots of organizations we're talking to who are like, listen, AI is not our central business, but we've built like AI solutions internally, and we want to be able to measure that. Or even smaller organizations or people who are not even training in AI, but just consuming APIs, then build like an AI solution on top of that. So there's like a whole range of things that we want to measure, and we want to go into draft in September, and then work on a number of case studies, hopefully my dream, and no one hold me to this, is by kind of Q1, Q2 next year, we're out and we start the ISO process then. But when we come out, we want to come out with like, here's a specification. It will come out with a training course that you can take to learn how to compute the specification. It will come out with the tooling so you can just plug in values and then you'll be able to get your numbers. And also come out with a number of case studies from organizations who like, this is how exactly we calculated it. And maybe you can learn from how we did it. So that's our goal.
Okay, well so we're looking at basically, first half of 2026. So there's still time to be involved, and and presumably later on in Q3, Q4, some of this will be going out in public for people to kind of respond or have something like the consultation there,
Yeah, there'll be a public consultation coming up soon.
This is useful to know because this takes us to our last story we were looking at, which is actually also talking about the challenges related to the working at the environmental footprint of other things, particularly websites. This is our final link of the podcast, which is a link to the IEE, where there's a post by, I believe it's Yannick Halilola, and oh dear, I'm not going to pronounce the other person's name very well. Johoveb Salinen. Oh dear, I'm so sorry for mispronouncing your names. I'm drawing attention to this because this is the first time in a while I've seen a peer-reviewed article in the IEE specifically, which I think is it's the International of Electrical Engineers. I forget what it stands for. Yes, thank you. They looked at both Firefox Profiler and Website Carbon. They basically started looking at the environmental footprint. What does using these website calculators actually tell you? And what can you use? And they had some recommendations about, okay, we've tried using these tools. What can we learn from that? And the thing that was actually particularly interesting was they were using Firefox Profiler specifically to look at the footprint of. They're basically saying that there's 2 or 3 insights that have probably come away from this, which I thought was interesting. One of them was that it's really hard to get meaningful numbers around data transfer, which I think is actually something that we've shared and we've covered in a lot of detail, and I'm finding very helpful for future discussions around creating something like a software carbon intensity for web for this. But the other thing I did was they spoke about the use of like tools out there like profilers, which do provide this direct measurement that does give you some meaningful numbers. But when you look at the charts, the differences aren't that high. For example, they were showing comparisons with things like Website Carbon, which shows massively different kind of readings for the carbon footprint of one site versus another. And then when they used other tools like, say, Firefox Profiler, the differences were somewhat more modest between these two things. So this kind of gives the impression that some of the tools that use like the sustainable web design model, they may be overestimating the effectiveness of changes you might be making as an engineer versus what gets measured directly. Now, there's obviously a elephant in the room in that this isn't measuring what's happening server side, but this is the first time I've seen a real deep dive by some people who are actually looking into this to come up with some things you can test, I suppose, or you can kind of you can reproduce to see if you're getting the same numbers from these people here. And this is actually quite a useful. I found it quite noteworthy and really nice to see. And I only would have found out about it because Yanda actually shared it inside the Climate Action Tech Slack.
So it was a paper inside IE or an article inside their publication.
It's a paper. So it's a peer-reviewed paper in volume 13 of IE, and they talk about the current state of the art, how people currently try to measure energy consumption on the web. Then they talk about some of the tools you can use for end user devices. Talk about some of the issues related to like trying to go on just data transfer alone and why that isn't necessarily the best thing to be using. But what kind of statements you could plausibly make. But as someone who ends up, the organization I work for, we implemented the sustainable web design model for this. Having something like this is so useful because we can now cite other peer-reviewed work that's in the public domain that we can say, hey, we need to update this based on this, or possibly do something, or an idea which I believe Professor Daniel Sheen shared with me. He said, well, if we've got figures for like the top 1,000,000 websites, the top 1,000 websites, maybe you could actually just experimentally validate those versus what you have in a model already, so you can get better numbers for this. There's a bunch of steps. Exactly. If you were to measure the top 1,000 ones compared to like the modeled figures, then that will give you an idea of the gap between the modeled figure and the ground truth. So you could end up with a better figure. There's a bunch of things that you could do out there which might make it easier to make this tooling much easier to use and much more likely to give people the signals they are craving to kind of build websites in a more kind of climate compatible fashion, for example.
I think it's important because I think people, like when you use a tool and it gives you a value, it's incentivizing a behavior, and it might be incentivizing the wrong behavior. And I think this is one of the things I find that when people get excited about a measurement, I don't, because I need to know the details behind it, because I know that if you're a little bit wrong, you're incentivizing the wrong thing, and you shouldn't just take it at face value. But it's really hard. I also understand it's really bloody hard, even for the tool makers to even figure out what to do here. So this isn't really I suppose it's not really criticism of anybody, but yeah, it's just really hard to figure this stuff out. But the Firefox stuff is using yours, isn't it? It's using CO2JS, isn't it?
I'm not sure if this actually uses the carbon figures we use, because we basically package up the numbers from Ember, which is a non-profit think tank who already published stuff. I can't remember if this actually is using the energy or the carbon figures, basically. But okay. we update the carbon figures every month anyway. So it might be ours. I need to kind of check if they measure in terms if they. I think they report this in energy, not carbon. Actually, it's what they used inside this. I'll need to reread it. We're coming up to time, actually.
Yeah, we're coming up to time. So this also, I think maybe just call out a little bit. So we're going to be running and you're leading it, the Cypher web assembly shortly in the foundation. And I think this can be this looks, my brief scan of it, like a very important pre-read, I presume, for a lot of the people who are going to be attending that assembly. Yeah,
I'm actually really pleased this came out. That was initially what I saw. Like, oh, great, this is a really nice, concise piece that covers this. This was another piece from Daniel Sheen talking about, okay, well, how do you measure network figures, for example? Because he's put some really, really good, interesting stuff inside that we don't have enough time to talk about, but but we'll share links to that inside that. Because yes, this is something that we'll be doing, and I'm looking forward to doing it. Yeah, and cripes, Asim, I've just realised we've gone way over.
We're well over. You've got to go. Go on, let's wrap up.
Dude, really lovely catching up with you again. Yeah. Oh, the final thing I need to give is this. Just quickly talking about this GSM, the green software movement thing that you were talking about here. Maybe I can just give you space to do that before we wrap up, because I know this is the project you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, so the movement is a platform that we've created. So it's movement.greensoftware.foundation. So this is where we will be putting a lot more of our attention moving forward in terms of engaging with the broader community. It's also where all of our training is going to be. So our current training is moving over there, and we just now have now that we've got like a real platform to publish training to. We're going to get training for all of our products and services. So the SI, Impact Framework, Soft, RTC, we're going to do training for all of them and have them available on the platform. And you'll be able to go in, you'll be able to learn about the products that we've created, learn about the foundation, get certified for your training. But also it's a platform where you can connect with other people as well. So you can meet people, have chats, have conversations, connect with people who are local to you. We've had over 130,000 people take our previous training, which unfortunately is on another platform. So we're going to be trying to move everybody over. So hopefully our goal is ultimately for this to be the platform where you go, at least from terms of the Green Software Foundation, to learn about our products, our standards, get involved. Will be our Champions program is moving over there as well. And we're just kind of like having this will be where we put a lot of our effort moving forward. And I recommend people go to it, join, sign up, take the training, and connect with others.
All right. Okay. Well, Asim, lovely catching up with you. And I hope you have a lovely rest of the week. And I guess I'll see you in the Slacks or the Zulips or whichever online tools we use to across past and future.
Zulips and all that is funny. Yeah, sounds good.
Zulips
Right, mate,
is our open source chat tool inside the Green Wave Foundation. It runs on Django.
Oh, is it?
It's wonderful. Yeah, it's really, really good. I cannot recommend it enough. If you are using Slack and you are sick of using Slack,
I'm sick of using Slack.
Use Zulip. Zulip is wonderful. Yeah, it's really, really good.
Nice. I can check it out. Yeah.
All right. Take care, man. See you around.
Bye.
Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Just a reminder to follow Environment Variables on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please do leave a rating and review if you like what we're doing. It helps other people discover the show. And of course, we'd love to have more listeners. To find out more about the Green Software Foundation, please visit greensoftware.foundation. That's greensoftware.foundation in any browser. Thanks again, and see you in the next episode.